throughout my whole career, I've always had a goal ahead of me. And if it's, winning a number of majors, staying number one, there's always something there. And what kind of kept me going the last couple years was the challenge of winning one more. And after I did that, 2 months after the Open of last year, I kind of go, what's next?
The world's number 2 tennis player just committed 99 unforced errors in a single match. 99 mistakes in 3 hours against a guy ranked 94th who nobody had ever heard of. Pete Sampras, the reigning Wimbledon champion, the man with the most devastating serve in tennis, completely unraveled on the clay courts of Roland Garros in 1995, like a champion boxer who forgot how to throw a punch. This wasn't just an upset, this was a meltdown of epic proportions that would trigger a decade-long curse. Gilbert Schaller, an Austrian journeyman, had just exposed something terrifying in Sampras's game, a crack in the armor that would widen into a chasm every single time he returned to Paris. And here's the twisted part. This nightmare was only beginning because what happened over the next 10 years would prove that sometimes the harder you want something, the more violently it destroys you. The 1995 French Open should have been different. Sampras came in riding high, having just won the Australian Open earlier that year. He was in peak form, destroying opponents left and right on every surface. He'd beaten Andre Agassi in the final down under and looked untouchable. The confidence was there. The game was sharp. Everything pointed to this being the year he'd finally make a deep run in Paris. But then came May 29th and everything changed. The match against Schaller started well enough. Sampras took the first set without too much trouble, and it looked like business as usual. He was dictating play, controlling the tempo, doing all the things that made him the second best player in the world. Then the rain came. During the delay, something shifted in ways nobody could have predicted. Maybe Schaller found confidence in the locker room, realizing he had nothing to lose. Maybe Sampras overthought his strategy during those idle minutes. Whatever happened in those quiet moments, when they returned to the court, it was like watching a completely different match. Schaller suddenly couldn't miss. His ground strokes were finding lines. Meanwhile, Sampras couldn't find the court with a map. The second set slipped away in a blur of unforced errors. Then the third disappeared just as quickly. Then the fourth. By the time it was over, Sampras had committed those 99 unforced errors, a number so shocking that commentators struggled to put it into words. After the match, Sampras sat in the press room looking absolutely gutted. He told reporters this loss would haunt him for a very long time. He wasn't exaggerating. He also said something that would prove prophetic and ultimately destructive. Winning the French Open had now become his crusade, and that's where the real problem began. Because when you want something too badly, when you turn a tennis tournament into a personal mission, the pressure doesn't motivate you, it suffocates you. Here's what made the whole situation even more frustrating. Sampras could actually play on clay. This wasn't a Wimbledon specialist who looked lost the moment he stepped on the red dirt. In 1994, just 1 year before the Schaller disaster, Sampras won the Italian Open in Rome, one of the most prestigious clay court tournaments in the world. He beat Boris Becker in the final and looked dominant doing it. His overall career win rate on clay was around 66%, which is actually respectable for someone known as a serve and volley player. He could handle the surface. He could adapt his game. He could win clay court matches against top competition. But somehow, the French Open specifically became his kryptonite. In 13 attempts at Roland Garros, he only made it past the second week 4 times. 4 times in 13 years. His best result came in 1996, when he finally broke through to the semifinals. Everyone thought this was it. This was the year Sampras would finally conquer Paris. He faced Yevgeny Kafelnikov, and what happened next was brutal. Kafelnikov didn't just beat Sampras, he humiliated him, winning in straight sets and handing him a bagel in the third set. 6-love. On the biggest stage, when Sampras was closest to his dream, he got completely shut out in a set. That match broke something in him. You could see it in his face afterwards. The realization that maybe, just maybe, this tournament would never be his. Let's talk about why clay was so cruel to Sampras's game. His entire style was built on weapons that simply didn't work the same way on slow courts. That massive serve, the one that terrorized opponents on on grass and hard courts lost its sting on clay. The ball sat up higher, bounced slower, and gave returners extra time to get into position. His flat, powerful forehand, which produced outright winners on faster surfaces, became just another shot on clay. And his serve and volley approach, the signature of his game, turned into a liability. On clay, opponents had time to set up for passing shots. They could dig out balls that would have been winners elsewhere. Every point became a grind, and grinding wasn't Sampras's strength. But the real issue was his backhand. On faster courts, Sampras could hide his backhand weakness with aggressive positioning and his ability to end points quickly with his serve or forehand. On clay, there was nowhere to hide. Opponents would target that backhand relentlessly, pushing him back, making him hit shot after shot until eventually the errors came. The surface exposed every flaw in his game and amplified them. It's worth noting that Sampras wasn't alone in this struggle. John McEnroe never won the French Open, neither did Boris Becker. Stefan Edberg came close, but never lifted the trophy. These were legends of the game, Hall of Famers, and they all had the same problem with clay. But here's the difference. None of them seemed to suffer quite like Sampras did. Their losses were disappointing, but expected. Sampras's losses felt personal, dramatic, almost tragic in how they unfolded. The mental aspect of Sampras's French Open failures can't be overstated. In 1998, he faced Ramon Delgado, a player ranked 97th in the world. This should have been a routine first-round match, a warm-up before the real competition began. Instead, Sampras lost in straight sets. Afterwards, he admitted something revealing. Unresolved issues with the French Open had begun playing on his mind. He couldn't shake the previous failures. Every time he stepped on those courts, the ghosts of past defeats were waiting for him. Tennis commentators at the time described him as looking like a fish out of water, flopping around in the dust. That's a harsh image, but it captured the reality. Sampras, so fluid and natural on other surfaces, looked uncomfortable and out of place on clay, and he knew it. In a later interview, he talked about that 1998 loss and said something haunting. He recognized mid-match that his time was running out. He was in his late 20s, his prime years were slipping away, and the French Open was still beyond his reach. He tried to convince himself he could win, tried to fool himself into believing this year would be different, but he couldn't do it anymore. The doubt had taken root too deeply. That's the insidious thing about mental blocks in sports. Once they establish themselves, they feed on themselves. Every loss confirms the fear. Every near miss reinforces the belief that you're cursed. And for Sampras, the French Open had become exactly that, a curse he couldn't break. Paul Annacone, Sampras's longtime coach, revealed something that cuts to the heart of the problem. After years of working with Sampras on his clay court game, after countless hours of practice and strategy sessions, Annacone admitted that Sampras wanted the French Open too badly. Think about that for a second. His coach, the person who knew his game better than anyone, identified the problem not as a technical flaw, but as an excess of desire. Sampras exhausted all his resources trying to adapt to clay. He modified his serve technique to get more spin. He worked on his footwork to handle the slower surface. He tried to be more patient in rallies, to construct points differently. Every possible adjustment was made, but the more he tried, the heavier the burden became. Winning the French Open stopped being a goal and became an obsession, and obsession in sports rarely leads to success. It leads to tension, overthinking, and paralysis when the moment arrives. Annacone also pointed out something crucial about the era Sampras played in. The surface transitions in the 1990s were extreme. Going from hard courts to clay to grass required completely different games. Today, courts play more similarly across surfaces, and players can use basically the same style everywhere. But in Sampras's time, you needed to transform your entire approach. For a player whose game was so specialized for fast courts, that transformation was almost impossible to achieve, especially under the immense pressure he put on himself. The competition Sampras faced at the French Open made everything harder. This wasn't a tournament where he could catch a break with a draw or face opponents having off weeks. Jim Courier was there, an American who grew up on clay and had already won the French twice. Sergi Bruguera, a Spanish clay court specialist, dominated Roland Garros in the mid-90s with back-to-back titles. Thomas Muster was virtually unbeatable on clay during his peak, winning 40 consecutive matches on the surface at one point, and then came Gustavo Kuerten, a Brazilian whose game was built specifically for sliding around on red dirt. These weren't just good players having good tournaments. These were elite clay court specialists in their prime. Sampras never got an easy path. He never caught them on bad days. Every time he made a run, he ran into someone who belonged on clay in a way he never could. The depth of competition in that era was also remarkable. Tennis analysts estimated that 30 to 40 players had a legitimate shot at winning the French Open in any given year during the 1990s. The unpredictability of clay, combined with the specialized skills required, meant that upsets were common and dominance was rare. Sampras found himself in an impossible situation, facing opponents who were perfectly suited to the surface, while he was fundamentally mismatched. And unlike today, where the Big Three dominated every surface for 2 decades, the 90s clay court scene was chaos. Sampras could be the best player in the world for most of the year, but come May and June in Paris, that ranking meant nothing. The final chapter of Sampras's French Open story is perhaps the saddest. In 2000, he entered Roland Garros knowing time was running out. He was 28 years old, still playing great tennis, but the window was closing. His first-round opponent was Mark Philippoussis, an Australian with a big serve who had the potential to be dangerous but was inconsistent. This was a winnable match. This should have been a match Sampras navigated to set up a deeper run. Instead, he lost in 4 sets, and that was it. Sampras never returned to the French Open. He played 2 more years on tour, winning Wimbledon again in 2000 and capturing the U.S. Open one final time in 2002 before retiring, but he never went back to Paris. Some saw it as acceptance, an acknowledgement that the French Open would never be his, and there was no point torturing himself anymore. Others saw it as surrender, a champion unwilling to face another humiliating defeat on clay. Either way, when Sampras retired in 2002 with 14 Grand Slam titles, the absence of a French Open trophy was impossible to ignore. He had completed every other major achievement in tennis. He'd won Wimbledon 7 times. He'd dominated the U.S. Open with 5 titles. He'd conquered Australia twice, but the career Grand Slam, the mark of the truly complete player, would never be his. That one tournament on that one surface in that one city had denied him a place in a very exclusive club. And the cruel irony is that if he had just won it once, just broken through one time, it would have erased all the other failures. One title would have made him whole, but that title never came. So what's the real reason Sampras never won the French Open? It wasn't purely about his serve and volley style, because he adapted that style and won on clay elsewhere. It wasn't just about the surface, because plenty of players with aggressive games have won at Roland Garros. And it wasn't only about the competition, though facing an army of clay court specialists certainly didn't help. The real reason was the toxic combination of everything at once. The surface exposed the weaknesses in his game that he could hide everywhere else. The competition never gave him a favorable draw or an easy path. And most importantly, the mental pressure of wanting it so desperately, of turning it into a crusade after that first devastating loss to Schaller, created a weight he couldn't carry. Sometimes in sports, trying harder doesn't make you better. It makes you tight, overthinking, unable to trust your instincts. That's what happened to Sampras at the French Open. Every year the pressure mounted. Every loss added another layer of doubt. By the end, he was playing not to lose rather than playing to win. And that's a mindset that guarantees failure. The tragic beauty of Sampras's career is that this one gap, this one unfulfilled dream, somehow makes his story more compelling. If he'd won everything, he'd be perfect but distant, almost inhuman in his achievements. The French Open failure made him relatable. It showed that even the greatest players have their demons, their limitations, their heartbreaks. It proved that wanting something desperately isn't enough, that talent and effort don't always guarantee success, and that sometimes the thing you chase the hardest is the thing that runs away the fastest. Would Sampras be considered greater if he'd completed the career Grand Slam? Absolutely. Would the conversation about his legacy be different? Without question. But would he be more interesting, more human, more real? That's debatable, because in the end, it's often our failures that define us as much as our successes. And Pete Sampras's failure at the French Open might be the most memorable thing about him. The greatest grass court player of his generation, the man with the most Grand Slam titles in history at the time of his retirement, brought to his knees by red clay and his own desperate desire to conquer it. That's not just a sports story, that's a human story.